Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. There has been a lot of debate over whether or not to reopen schools, restaurants, and other businesses during the pandemic. And fueling this debate is the hope that comes with the availability of now 3 vaccines. However, with this hope comes some controversy. Who should get the vaccine first? Can the vaccine be trusted? Should students as well as teachers get the vaccine before they return to school? To help us answer these and other questions, we welcome to our classroom Dr. Rhea Boyd, pediatrician and child health advocate from the Palo Alto Medical Foundation and the University of California, San Francisco, Benioff Children's Hospital. Dr. Boyd, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Let's get right down to it, why we're here today. And are these vaccines safe? Are there any side effects that we need to be concerned about?
So first, let's take on the question of safety. This is the number one question we hear from Black folks across the country. So I want to say loud and clear, these vaccines are safe. And the way we know that is because we did rigorous clinical trials that included tens of thousands of Americans that told us that they were safe. And then we are now at a point where more than 50 million Americans have gotten the COVID vaccine. And we've been collecting careful data along the way to make sure we can really be confident when we say that they're safe, and we are. Second, in terms of side effects, the side effects are common. So about a quarter of people who get one of the mRNA vaccines, their names are Pfizer or Moderna. If you get one of those vaccines, about a quarter of folks will have some fatigue or a little headache or some dizziness even. But those are symptoms that are signs your immune system is working. So don't be alarmed if you have those symptoms. It's a good sign. It means your immune system is building up the antibodies that would help you fight COVID if you were exposed.
Well, we know, again, you mentioned the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and we know that those are 2-dose vaccines. I mean, you have to get you get 1 dose now, then a couple of weeks later, you get your 2nd dose. And now the newly released Johnson & Johnson vaccine is only 1 dose. So what's the difference? Is one vaccine better than the other? What should we be looking out for?
This is a great question, and it's kind of hot off the press. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was just received emergency use authorization. And what we know from that data is that it is equally as effective as the other 2 vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. And it's equally as effective when it comes to preventing hospitalization, so you won't get super sick from COVID if you are exposed, and equally as effective at preventing death, which is the number one thing we want to be doing, particularly for communities of color and Black folks who have been so disproportionately affected by the pandemic.
Now, speaking of Black and brown communities, we know that there's been a lack of trust concerning government research and within those communities. And so were Black and brown people a part of the development of these vaccines or during the trials?
Absolutely. Black scientists were a part of the teams that actually developed the vaccines. And it's important that everyone realize that these are some of the most diverse clinical trials we've ever had in the history of vaccine development. It was so important to clinicians like me and the rest of the scientific community that we make sure that when we say the vaccines are safe and effective for everyone, we really mean everybody. And so there was a concerted effort to include folks of all backgrounds in the trials.
I understand that there is a video series that's being produced by the Kaiser Family Foundation in conjunction with the Black Coalition Against COVID. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that series is? And I think you had something to do with it as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so excited to talk about that video series because Black healthcare workers and I across the country have been working on it now for months. Before any vaccines even had emergency use authorization, we were working on preparing information, knowing that Black folks would have questions and knowing that people would have normal concerns. And so we wanted to put together a package that respects those concerns and answers each of those questions. And so when you go to the website, www.betweenusaboutus.org, you can see 50 frequently asked question videos right now, 30-second quick little videos to tell you, can I get the vaccine if I'm pregnant? Or what about risks of infertility? Like all of the common questions that folks have been asking, we answer right there.
Let's talk a little bit about availability. So I know that, again, that there has been the third vaccine has been approved on the emergency basis. So we have those 3 vaccines that are up for approval. But let's talk about the realistic availability, especially within Black and brown communities. We know that the vaccines were available in certain communities, but not in others, while those Black and brown communities disproportionately have had more incidents of COVID, but they seem to get the least amount of vaccines that are available for them. What can we do to turn those tables around?
This is a major concern of healthcare workers of color across the country, is that we know our communities have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic, and we already see early evidence that our communities have some of the least access to the vaccine. And so our project has been fortunate to partner with the White House COVID Task Force to have those difficult conversations to say, what are we doing to actually increase access? We are working to make sure that folks have the information they need to make the choice, but we also have to be a part of efforts to make sure that vaccine is convenient and right in folks' backyard so that when they are ready and it's their turn to get it, that it's easy for them to do so. So please know that we are working on that. And if it's not in your neighborhood now, that it should be coming to your neighborhood soon.
Now, what happens if you get somebody who says, I didn't catch COVID. I've been very careful about where I've been going, and I've been keeping myself isolated from people. And I know that I'm relatively healthy. Should I still have to get the vaccine? I think that I don't really need it. So what would you say to somebody in that situation?
We hear some younger folks making comments just like that. I'm not worried about getting COVID, or if I get COVID, I know I won't get super sick. Why should I get vaccinated? It's important that we all understand as a society that the reason we need these vaccines is so that we can end the devastation of the pandemic. Even if you haven't been sick, the pandemic has shaped how we all experience life right now. We're wearing masks when we go outside our homes. Some of our kids have not been to school in like a year. We aren't having the same experiences, or we can go and gather at concerts and restaurants in the ways that we like to. And so the quickest way for us to get back to the things that we love to do is to get to what we call herd immunity, which is where 70 to 80% of folks are vaccinated. And so the spread of COVID-19 plummets and goes way, way down.
Let me ask you this question, because I'm sure you may get this a lot as well. Now that we have this vaccine, but we also have noticed that there are variants that are popping up to the COVID strain. So with these vaccines coming out now and these variants, are they going to have any effect on the variants, or do we have to wait yet for another vaccine to come out to combat these new strains that are popping up?
So the vaccines that are out now have shown effectiveness against the COVID variants that are out, including that South African variant that's the most contagious. But what we want to do as a community is make sure we can get vaccinated as quickly as possible, because that will also decrease the rate of new variants coming out. So there's a way that we could make choices that make sure that new variants don't emerge. So getting vaccinated is one of those ways, and making sure that at least 70 to 80% of us are vaccinated is one of the ways to decrease that risk.
Should students still be considering or parents be considering vaccinating their children? And if not, what are some of the other precautions that students can take as well?
So first, it depends on the person's age. So for children who are 16 years and younger, for the 2 mRNA vaccines, those vaccines didn't include, their clinical trials didn't include children, so it's not available for children to get right now. And for folks 18 years and older, you can't get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine right now for the same reason. So there are clinical trials that are happening right now with children, and we hope to have authorization to give children the vaccine soon, but we're just not there yet. But for college-age students, you are absolutely eligible to get the COVID vaccine. And when your turn comes up, we hope you choose to, because we know a lot of you guys have also been going to virtual school. You can't participate in collegiate, athletics. You're not able to go to the normal events that you should be doing at that fun time in your life. And so getting vaccinated with you and your friends and community and family getting vaccinated protects everybody as we start to gather and get back together.
Where do we think that teachers should be placed on the priority list? We know that, of course, the elderly of 65 and older are at a high risk category. We definitely want our first responders and our essential workers to get the vaccine as well, to be put on a high priority. Where do we think that teachers should be placed on this list? Are they high up on the priority, or do they kind of slide back a little bit?
Teaching is such a critical profession that I think during the pandemic, all of us have just come to understand even more how valuable teachers are to all of our lives and the real role that they're playing in the lives of children. So we, as pediatricians, love teachers. I'll say the Biden administration has kind of answered this question for us. They have said that teachers should be prioritized to receive vaccination through any of the federal vaccination sites. And most of those sites are at local pharmacies or your mass vaccination sites in your community. So if you are a teacher and you're looking for vaccines, look up a pharmacy near you and you can call and see if they're vaccinating teachers, because across the country, that shift should be happening right now.
Can you give us that website once again where we can go to get any additional information on it and to view those videos that you were working on?
Absolutely. Folks can go to www.betweenusaboutUs.org to learn more. We also have a YouTube page, Between Us About Us, or Greater Than COVID. And there you can also just see the videos. And we're going to post a calendar of events, because we're also going to bring these conversations to communities live, so that if you have questions you want to have answered by a healthcare professional in real time, we're hoping to host some town halls to let people do that.
What are some of the other precautions that parents can take with their children? Because we know that a lot of parents are still reluctant to send their children back to school, even when schools do reopen. What are some of the things that they can do to help prepare their children and to keep them as safe as possible?
So the same safety guidelines that we were trying to follow this whole pandemic are still really important now, even now that we have vaccines. People need to continue to wear masks when you're around people who aren't in your household. You want to limit your gathering in groups, particularly in areas that don't have great ventilation. So make sure if you're gathering with folks who are not in your household, you're distancing where you gather. You have the greatest ventilation possible, which outside is the best place to do that. And that you're wearing masks. In areas of the country like where you guys live, where it's starting to get cold, it means some of us might have to meet up on Zoom or FaceTime or Google Meet or however you meet on your computer instead of in person. And that's okay, because now that we have these vaccines, we won't have to do it that much longer.
If you had one thing that you wanted our audience to truly understand regarding COVID-19 and the role that they play in eradicating this particular pandemic, what would that be?
I would say it's twofold. The first thing is that the COVID-19 vaccines are the single most effective preventative tool we have to get out of this pandemic. And second, they are absolutely safe. So it's the most effective tool we have, and it's a safe tool we can all feel confident in using to help us end this true devastation.
Thank you for taking some time and spending some time with us today. So we would definitely like to thank our guest today, pediatrician and public health advocate and co-developer of the video series, The Conversation Between Us About Us, Dr. Rhea Boyd, for coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. We now welcome to our classroom American Lung Association spokesperson, Dr. Cedric Rutland, who is also board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary, and critical care. Dr. Rutland, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Hey, thanks for having me. I hope you're having a great morning, great day.
I know you're the spokesperson for the American Lung Association, or one of the many that they have. So what role is the American Lung Association playing in providing information about the importance of getting vaccinated?
Yeah, the American Lung Association has a huge role. And when you go to lung.org, you can actually visualize the role that they play. And when you look at the website, not only do they provide specific information on what coronavirus is, what vaccination is, but they also provide information on many different lung diseases and air pollution and how it can affect you medically and from a societal standpoint. So I think that they play a very vital role in all of this.
How did you get involved with becoming their national spokesperson?
That's an interesting story. Nobody's actually ever asked me that. And I don't even know if American Lung Association knows this answer. But about 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, something like that, I was working for a larger pulmonary group before I started my own practice. And one of the managers said, you should apply for this. I came across this thing. You should apply for this thing. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but I don't have time. Like, I got to go to work. She's like, I'll do your application for you. And I said, all right, cool. So she did the application for me. I wrote all my personal statements and everything I had to write. And lo and behold, I get this email like, hey, you've been selected. And I was totally surprised, like completely surprised. Flew to Chicago, not too long after that. And I'm in the room with Lung Association and 11 other of my peers. And I actually formed some really great friendships from that meeting. And it was a great weekend, great media training. And ever since that day, I've kind of been a part of American Lung Association and what we do.
We know that there's a lack of trust concerning government research within the Black and brown communities. And that's one of the reasons that people are very skeptical about taking or going out and getting this vaccine or any of the vaccines. So how important is it that this skepticism be addressed?
There's a couple of things I want to say to that, because I think that several of these points are important. Number one is I understand the distrust that we have, right? I mean, I'm a Black man. I get it. Like, I understand that there's healthcare inequities that exist. I understand the Tuskegee experiment and how people use that as an example of distrust and Henrietta Lacks and all of that. But I think what communities of color need to understand is that the science behind vaccination is what is most important. And not only that, but even understanding this. And this is a story you probably never heard of. In the 1706, there was a slave that was purchased. His name was Onesimus. This is around the time of smallpox. He's in Boston. A minister, a faith-based leader, had purchased him. He understands, Onesimus, slave from West Africa. He understands the power and the theory behind vaccination and says to his slave master, hey, what we were doing in Africa is, when you get smallpox, you develop these pustules on your skin. We were actually taking those pustules, popping them and putting them in broken skin of people. And then it come to find out they didn't get sick with smallpox. So he suggested this to his master, and his master actually listened to him. And he said, he tried to talk about it. His master did. But of course, during that time, when you have this group of Caucasians around just kind of doing what they were doing at the time, nobody wanted to listen to him. Like, we're not going to do this. This guy's Black. He's what he's talking about. But he kept pushing and pushing. A doctor believed him, and they actually inoculated 242 people from Boston with a pustule that was popped, right? And put it in broken skin. Out of those 242 people, only 6 died. That was 1 in 40. For smallpox at the time, 1 in 7 died. This is where vaccination was born. And most Black people don't know that a slave is the one who suggested it first in this country.
That is definitely some information that our listeners could use and will help, because I know one of the other things that's been touted a lot is, especially when it comes to the vaccine, is that it was a Black doctor, a Black female doctor, who was working on the current vaccines we have and was very instrumental in getting it done. So there is a lot of behind the scenes work that's being done from the Black perspective. Now, What do you know anything about that you can tell us about the trials that were being done? How many Black and brown people were involved in the trials, or how involved were we with the actual clinical trials that took place as well?
Yeah, I can't give you the exact number, but I can tell you, I think it was around 10% of the trial participants were Black and brown, 9.6% in one, 9.7, 10%, whatever in the other one. And I'm talking the mRNA vaccines right now, because again, I think it's important for people to understand that you want an equitable distribution of race in clinical trials. But I also think it's important for people to understand that when you look at the human body on a cellular level, you can't tell who's Black and white. You don't know who's Asian. You don't know who's Latino. You don't know that. And so I think it's, although it is extremely important to distribute clinical trials equitably and allow people the opportunity to participate equitably, I also want people to understand that from a science standpoint, you can't really tell, not from a cellular level. It's not like our bodies operate significantly different than a white body.
Talk to us a little bit about what it means, what this phraseology herd immunity actually means, and why, therefore, would it be important for us to take the vaccinations a little bit more seriously?
That's a good question. When you go to lung.org, within the toolkit, we do talk about herd immunity. But what herd immunity actually means is this. When you look at a group of people, let's say you're looking at 10 people, all right? No one's vaccinated. So a disease is able to freely distribute itself throughout all 10 people, okay? If 5 of those people are vaccinated, all right, 5 out of the 10, the disease can't freely move between those people because they're not going to transmit this disease as well, because the disease is going to be recognized sooner and it's going to be cleared sooner. So this is kind of the beginnings of the foundation of the concept of herd immunity. The disease doesn't have an opportunity to infect multiple people. And so even the most vulnerable person may not be getting exposed to the disease as a result of someone else being vaccinated. And so what we say is to achieve herd immunity, in other words, essentially stop the transmission of disease, we need a certain percentage of the population that's immune, either immune because of vaccination or immune because they had the disease. When we look at SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, we think that number is around 70%. But honestly, real world wise, who knows?
I understand that the American Lung Association has recently produced a PSA regarding getting vaccinated. Tell us about that PSA work and the work that ALA is doing with the Center for Black Health and Equity.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the best thing. So when you look at the American Lung Association's partnership with the Center for Black Health and Equity, what they did together was create the world's greatest toolkit as it pertains to COVID-19. I'm going to tell you about this toolkit. When you open up this toolkit, what you're going to see, first of all, the faces that you see are our faces, it's Black faces. And then several leaders, NAACP leaders, Black leaders across this country are on this toolkit. And throughout the toolkit, there is the story of Onesimus that I just mentioned, but there's also the foundation of understanding how illness works so that you can better understand how vaccination works. And what they're doing is they're arming you with information, right? And they're giving you all of this ammunition of information so that you can make an informed decision, which is what is important. You want to use trusted sources like lung.org, like the American Lung Association and their partnership with the Center for Black Health and Equity. So that way people can develop this understanding and make their own decision. That's important. It's not important for us to just tell people, go get vaccinated because it's good for you, right? That doesn't quite work. You know that in our people, it doesn't quite work telling them what to do. But when you arm them with the information, tell them the story of Onesimus, tell them how the vaccine works, tell them how illness works. Then we sit there and we think about it and we're like, oh, all right, I am going to go get this, right? It's almost like the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, where you're just entering the mind of somebody and you're kind of placing things in the right place so that they can come to the right decision, right? That's how I kind of think about it. So I think that is excellent. The PSA video is good. Again, it shows us what the result of being vaccinated is actually going to do. But I think the most important thing by far and away for me is that toolkit.
So, and you mentioned during that response that there were several community leaders that were involved in this, and you see within that toolkit. So how can those leaders and even others in our communities, people who aren't necessarily seen as community leaders, but how can any of us really get involved to help spread awareness of the importance of vaccination? And where can they go other than, I know you mentioned lung.org, but is there anywhere else that people may be able to go to get more information?
Right. Again, what we can do and what Black leaders can actually do is partner with other institutions, right? So you maybe want to partner with the faith-based organizations in the area. You maybe want to partner with the regional American Lung Association. You want to partner with the Black Health and Equity Center for Black Health and Equity to develop strategies of education in your certain area. That's one of the things that I think is important, because again, when you develop that strategy of education, not only are you going to allow people to make their own informed decision from a trusted resource like lung.org or American Lung Association, but you also may stimulate a young Black mind to go into medicine. You may have created the idea of becoming a physician by doing that. And so those are the types of things that I think are extremely important in the community. And that I think is exponentially going to lead to better outcomes as we move throughout time.
If there was one thing that you could inform our audience about, to tell our audience regarding their understanding of COVID-19 vaccines, the role that they as individuals play in us moving forward, what would that one thing be?
People need to understand that we do what our friends do. So when you look at our population, our Black population, less people are getting vaccinated. If less people are getting vaccinated, that means you're less likely to have a friend that's been vaccinated, which also means that you're less likely to do it. When you look at the Caucasian population, 67%, 70% of the vaccinations have been for them. They're all vaccinated, right? And so they're all telling each other to go get vaccinated. We need to do a better job of that. We need to go get vaccinated. And then we need to tell our boys or, our homegirls like, hey, you need to get vaccinated. When I go to the barbershop, I spend an extra hour at the barbershop talking about COVID-19, talking about SARS-CoV-2 and the need for vaccination. We got to be able to get in those environments and talk about it in areas that we trust, like the barbershop. So that would be my biggest message from my standpoint. From an American Lung Association standpoint, go to lung.org, download that toolkit, and develop that understanding to make that informed decision.
Now, what would you say to those people who say, well, I'm thinking about getting the vaccine, but it's just not available to me in my neighborhood? And of course, we're talking about Black and brown neighborhoods where hasn't been as equitably distributed as it has in other neighborhoods. So what can be done to help to equal out the distribution? So
this is important. If you're a minority physician, I develop partnerships with certain pharmacies in my area, and I will get phone calls when they have extra vaccine. And I'm calling my people to go get vaccinated, right? That's who I make the phone call to, is they have extra vaccine. You need to go here to this address at this time. You're going to go get vaccinated. And I think that as a minority physician, that's my duty, right? I have to narrow this gap, right? People aren't going to go out there and do it just because. They're going to educate us. They're going to tell us where to go. If you go to lung.org, you can see the vaccine tracker. You can see in your region when the vaccine is available to you, but you got to be active. Just like if you want anything in this world, you got to be active. So I think it's important for minority physicians to establish these relationships with the places that are distributing the vaccine to be able to get it to their community.
We definitely would like to thank our guest into our classroom today, American Lung Association spokesperson, Dr. Cedric Rutland, and also board certified in internal medicine and pulmonary and critical care.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Once again, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.